is oje da daring asu tin ga shu gore da tin lang dong ki tin ngol da chu ju su gore wa ngol chu ba de lang ji zawa xin yin den bi chu lang ring ge lang ji zawa xin yin den bi chu se ya de ne lang dong ki du song jawa da dan ti chu se ngol chu ba ju song de ge xin yin den su den du go zar ma ba Lanji Tawa Shinyan Tempi Tsu, Ten Lo Jeda Zhang Yinba. What the and the Karsagre, Ten Lo Jeda Zhang Yinba, Jebu Chungu da Tomo in Laji Rimbada, Din Tang, Tomo in Laji Rimbada, Jebu Chimbi Laji Rimbas, what the Karsugore, Dalandrum, what the lady was.
So we've entered the explanation of this root text of the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment by the great master Atisha. And we've entered the part where we've gone over guru devotion or dependence upon a spiritual friend. And we see here that it's where it says, I pay homage with great respect to the conquerors of the three times. Here this is not only an expression of homage and an offering of homage, but also the reference to the guru devotion or dependence upon a spiritual friend in this first stanza that is relative to all of the other Lam Rims. So when we speak of the Lam Rim refers to the stages of the path for beings of small capacity, the stages of the path for beings of medium capacity, and the stages of the path for beings of great capacity. So here, when we speak of the path itself that is illuminated by this particular text, and who we must depend upon a teacher to ascertain, we're speaking of these three levels of the stages of the path. So if we were to abbreviate all of Buddha's teachings, or to categorize all Buddhist teachings, we would find that they would all go into these three categories. The teachings shared in common with beings of the small capacity, teachings shared in common with beings of medium capacity, and the great capacity practitioners, or the great scope. So all of these scopes encompass the Buddhist teachings, all of the Buddhist teachings.
Oje tatane son de kandese son yongwa de kandese na tane ane ngaso ngason ge dungen ga yo mares ngason ge dungen de ka ne ane ngaso lhada me tenza dendro de ngaso yoba yina ga yo mares ane sanji ge remba tambo tele ngason ge dungen de ka ne dendro ndo ya ge ane lang ge remba tambo ten yo mares ote dendro ndo ya ge ane chue de la ngotu chue so go ba So when
we speak of stages of the path, and we speak of the small scope or the teachings shared in common with beings of small capacity, this refers to a practitioner or a being who develops a dislike or a desire to definitely get out of the lower realms of suffering, and desires to be reborn into the higher realms of the gods and the humans and so forth. So this type of practitioner devotes all of his or her efforts to being able to be reborn into the higher realms. And this type of being is called a being of small capacity or small scope. And this falls into the category of the preliminary practices of the Dharma, which are necessary for other stages. So this is the stages of the path which will allow a practitioner to relinquish rebirth into the lower realms. And this is the small scope or the small capacity.
ane kaso kore lunga yi song diba la tena nga song chegre nga song chen an jibu yo mare nga song dunga nga gabu me nga song ta ne ane la da me den sa sa ane thoya nga thashi de ji thashi de jawn ji len de song a din sa res jawn ro na len de ane nya bo to ju song ko sha na ji o de je ba yin na nga song dunga ka ne den ro la da mal ro sa res.
So the being of the small capacity recognizes the limited capacities of the mind that he or she has, and recognizes that there are three doors of the body, speech, and mind that one can create virtue or non-virtue with. And then this type of practitioner recognizes that the accumulation of non-virtue or misdeeds through the body, speech, and mind propels him or her into a rebirth into the lower realms. So he or she then looks for a method to abandon the causes for rebirth into the lower realms, and recognizes that that method is by having a firm and stable refuge in the three jewels, becoming familiar with karma and its effects, or actions and their consequences, and practicing confession, or practicing confession combined with the four opponent powers. So this type of practitioner tries to purify the misdeeds which will lead him or her to the lower realms, but does not go beyond that scope.
지금 중국의 다 내송의 동el 타네 하다메 대상 장 투나 상바 여기들 지금 중국에서 그랬어. 내송의 동el 타네 하다메 대상 장 투나 냐비 상로 여기 안에 전도당 렌데 냐소len 되는데 지금 중국에서 그랬어. 네 전도당 렌데 냐는데 지금 딩게 냐소len 그래 팀에버게 냐소len 그래 티제버게 냐소len 그래서 안에
So this type of firm person has a firm resolve to be reborn into the higher realms, and wants to become a god or a human in his or her next life. And this has a very firm and stable resolve to achieve these results. So the negativities that he or she must abandon in order to produce the higher rebirth results are abandoned. And then this person becomes familiar and stable in refuge and the law of action and its consequences, or karma and its effects. But this does not mean this is an exclusive practice of the being of small capacity. These topics also must be practiced by beings within the medium scope and the great scope, or beings of medium capacity and great capacity. And this is why these are called teachings shared in common with beings of small capacity, because they are shared in common with the medium and great scope as well.
어제 당가서 단다가서 매일 대상 돈을 요하르스 아니 제마양 가서 하다 매일 대상 된데 네 좋아해야 되고 요바이나 어디 조때 상지가 송자 도준양내 제고르스 도준양내 제바이나 사이 제와 용거래 할제 도거래 멀제 도거레스 어디 송도거스르스.
So if we desire to have this type of rebirth into the gods and the human realms, then we must practice what the Buddha has taught as the method to achieve those results. At this moment, we have this human form, but we must utilize this human form to practice what the Buddha has taught to be able to achieve this form again and higher.
어제 다더네 지분들이 다 팀에 발라고 팀에 봐서나 지분들이서는 지발했어. 팀에 봐서 지분들이 되지 않는데 그랬어. 말해봐. 지분들이 되게 다더네 지분 종을 놓고 상로 토하랬어. 다더네 내가 속도 동을 타네 지금도 그 동을 마타나 가르치는 메달 할 제바 있네. 제가 나지 동에다 셰야다 어떻게 걸로 하던 말이요 그랬어. 그 동해지 동해 주유 동해 차반 주시지 동해 어디 솔래 내가 좋네 아니 그 나로 집 타바장 또 나냐베 상로 여행들 제번 딩세도 거스 나로 집 타바장 또 나냐베 상로 여행 될 테메 봐 제번 딩스라고 거스 말봐.
So the next scope is the medium scope, or beings of medium capacity. And the medium scope and the Hinayana path are synonymous. So if you have a medium scope, you necessarily have Hinayana path. If you have Hinayana path, you necessarily have medium scope. So they are synonymous, or mutually inclusive. So this medium person of medium capacity is a little bit higher than the being of small capacity, in that they do recognize the downfalls of the rebirth into the lower realms, the suffering of the lower realms of hell, hungry ghost, and animal, and so forth. But they also recognize the suffering of the higher realms and recognize that even the humans and the gods have the suffering of change, the pervasive compounded suffering, the suffering of birth, old age, the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. So this type of practitioner wishes to renounce all of cyclic existence and notices the downfalls of every realm of cyclic existence, and then desires to definitely get out or become liberated from cyclic existence for him or herself alone, not focusing on others, just focusing on him or herself. So this type of practitioner who wishes to definitely get out or renounce cyclic existence altogether or renounce the 6 realms altogether is called a being of medium capacity, or a Hinayana practitioner.
어제 다들 저번에 되게 되네 가서 그래 타바투야 타들 다 가서 그래 덴바지도 용도 말아봐 덴바지 동행데 뭐 군주 덴바 동행데 마도 군주 덴바니들 내반 좋네 내가 그 삼바 되네 동행 덴바도 군주 덴바 뽕비 뽕바들 타발로 타바 말봐 도군이 뽕비 타바들라 타바장 토나냐 상로요 와르스 타바 토야게 터더 가려와서나 터더네 공기 하바송들레스 주딘지 라바 띵은진지 라바 싫어지 라바 주 어떠송 냐래제도 와르스 말바.
Okay. So the being of medium capacity wishes to renounce or definitely get out from cyclic existence, the 6 realms of cyclic existence altogether. So he or she then recognizes the necessity to become familiar with the 4 Noble Truths: the truth of suffering, the truth of origin, the truth of cessation, and the truth of path. And this type of practitioner abandons the truth of suffering and the truth of origin of suffering, abandons the actual origin, and then practices a path which will lead he or she to nirvana or to liberation. For him or herself alone. And this liberation is induced by practicing the 3 higher trainings: the higher training of ethics, the higher training of concentration, and the higher training of wisdom. So the medium capacity practitioner relies upon the 4 Noble Truths, the 2 of the truths to be abandoned and the 2 of the truths to practice, and then practices that in union with the 3 higher trainings of ethics, concentration, and wisdom to achieve their final goal of liberation.
어제 다들 가서 그래 다들 동에 가서 그래 동에 대마 군주 대마되게 안에 동에도 속근갈로 죽근주라 되는 정도 와르스 군주 다토소나 덴진라 되는 정도 와르스 말바 덴진 되게 안에 덴지되게 춘나 대바 주반진이 와르스 들로로시르 대용하고 녀모제 레사네 로아리돌도 코도 와르스 말바 다드네 디니에보 안에 춘나 대바 마루버도베 라지 대마소 말바 데메도베 라지 대바데 조냐네 제와르스 춘나 대바 마루버도베 라데게 덴진는 와르스 덴진은 용도 덴지가 더부 녀모다 레 동에 칼레글은 가와시.
So the medium capacity practitioner recognizes that suffering is actually caused by the grasping at true establishment, and grasp at the idea that things truly exist or are truly established from their own side. So the being of medium capacity then applies various antidotes to this wrong consciousness or this mistaken view, and arrives at the assertion that things do not truly exist, things are not truly established. And that arrival allows the person to lessen the grasping at true existence, which causes the karma and afflictions in the first place. So the medium capacity practitioner and their true paths are the true paths of recognition of the lack of true establishment of phenomena. So once this takes place and the practitioner recognizes this in more and more subtle levels of the grasping at true existence, which creates the negativity in the first place, are eradicated.
어제 다시 잡아래 소나 메바 담부도 봐도 단도 봐도 타만 다시 군도 봐 제자발이 송아도 어디인서스 제부 종어 되게 소나 메바 담부도 송도 령하게 디바도 까네 안에 령하게 디바도 뻔네 안에 들르르하게 터지데 제부 종어게 제고레스 말봐 녀모모들 녀부 땡도고 말레스 다 제부 되게 녀모그 자와 댄징게 녀보 돈이도 싫어 공부를 때네 타발을 줘야지 어들래도 거레스 타마다시 그도 와서야 되게 댄제다 녀모비 바차데 티바 재미 본 거레스 바차도 본좀 타지 잡아 자는 거레 상제 두고 거레스 집으송 해야도 어디서레스 소나 메바 담부도 봐도 단도 봐도 타마다시 그도 봤어 담보 령하게 먹어도 본 던던로하게 타주데 최고 최대 뭐도 최대 제부 종원이 하려고 그래서 봐도 단도 와서야 돼 제분딩 그 다음에 또 싫어라 때네 안에 다도 좋은지 댄지 다티 제부 녀모바 레 동에 보네 타발로하게 최대 제분딩 그러고 그래서 타마다시 군도 봐서도 녀모가 잡아 봐차데 안에 대바 재미 상주주도 세진의 사조랑 공부를 때네 안에 바자도 오는 상지야 대바 재미 주주도 안에 어디서 말이야
Ulongare.
지자바
We can find in Arya Deva's 400 verses a quote that speaks of the initial stages, the medium stages where the initial stages where one achieves merit, the second stages where one achieves release, and the third stages where one achieves excellence. And here, this refers to the three scopes. The first scope referring to a person who has recognized that he or she must abandon misdeeds accumulated through the body, speech, and mind, and abandon particular things in order to not be reborn into the lower realms and to be able to achieve the rebirth into the higher realms of existence of the gods and the humans. Then the being of medium capacity recognizes the downfalls of all six realms of cyclic existence and then practices various antidotes, such as recognizing that things are not truly established because they dependently originate. And then this formula and familiarization with this lessens the grasping at true existence and then eradicates the afflictive obstructions and allows that being to eventually become a foe destroyer, or allows that being to be liberated from cyclic existence altogether. But then there are still imprints of the actual afflictions that are left over, or the obstructions to omniscience that are left from the actual afflictive obstructions. So it's the imprints of the afflictive obstructions are still hanging around. So the being of medium capacity does not have the ability to have omniscience and complete Buddhahood. So then the being of great capacity engages in various practices, making a union of method and wisdom, and achieving the mind that aspires to enlightenment or bodhicitta, and practicing the 5 Mahayana paths and the 10 bodhisattva grounds to be able to eradicate those obstructions to omniscience, or the imprints of the afflictive obstructions, in order to achieve complete omniscience and Buddhahood. So this is the difference between these three scopes, or these three capacities, whereas the first renounces the lower realms, the second renounces cyclic existence, and the third wishes to renounce not only cyclic existence but free all sentient beings from that suffering, and that being can do so because he or she is omniscient, because the obstructions to omniscience have been eradicated. So here where it says, understand that there are three kinds of persons because of their small, middling, and supreme capacities, I shall write clearly distinguishing their individual characteristics. And in the Aryadeva's 400 verses, this is where we can find the parallel stanza that means exactly the same thing, where they speak of gaining merit, striving for release, and achieving excellence.
What things are that the name also that the Jibuntin Sukumar, Jibuntin Landrunk all the Dua, CB Dele, Joshushi, DB Lele Dudani, Kanji Rajan Tandani, Jibutan Dishas, Jibutan Dishas, what the Kusul Budget meet.
So now we've arrived at the medium capacity, or beings of medium capacity. And that's the fourth stanza, where it says, "Those who seek peace for themselves alone, turning away from worldly pleasures and avoiding destructive actions, are said to be of middling capacity."
Tati Dunda the CB Dele, Sibasan Quaro, Qua, Cicerons, Qua, and the CB Dele Joshua, Siba Dwayoro, Siba and then Jude Karzugure, Sibal the Karzugure. Sibal hal the way you are, mal the way you are, what the Zuknala Dunga is, Dunga Dunga, the Jew Dunga, the Chaban Duji Dunga, what the Sule Judge Kasugure. Juntan, Nabanjunguars, Sibi Dele Joshushi, Dibi Lele Dudan, Sibi Dele Joshushi, Sibi Dele Joshush on du, Peshe Dunga, Nevajagun, Digodo, Sibi Dele Joshushi, Dibi Lele Dudan, Sibi the Wa. CB Dunga, the Jukala Tension Warisana, Lege Kunju, Yomo Kunjula Nation Europa. Dibi Lele Dotanis, Dibi Le, Tatane Kashuar, and then the Dibi Les, Dibasana Magol Gograva. Tatane Tan Jibunting, Kuala Kuji, Lake Ngalo, Magoa, Imi Chabayo Marava, and the Lege Kunju, Yomo Kunju Surva. What to Dibi Lele Dotanis? Dungela Dungela Shena Ti Jo, and then later on Yomo Kunju Langabajuna, Dele Dubashi was Dubi Dani, Kaji Rajas Tandani, Jibutan and Dinshas, Takante, Dunga, Juling Abajune, Dunga Juna Jeba, Bumbi, Tabatan Tuna, and Habison Dele, Jibuntin, Marba.
So those who seek peace for themselves alone, turning away from worldly pleasures. Here, worldly pleasures speak of, worldly here in the Tibetan says sipi, which is more of cyclic existence pleasures, pleasures of cyclic existence. So this is speaking of turning away from the pleasures within the 6 realms of cyclic existence. So here, this is and avoiding destructive actions. The destructive actions here are the cause of suffering in the second noble truth. So when we look at the 4 noble truths, the truth of suffering and the truth of origin, the destructive actions themselves are the truth of origin. So one needs to abandon the actions and the so forth in order, the negative actions and so forth, in order to be able to achieve the peace itself. So that type of being turns away from the happiness of cyclic existence of the 6 realms because of recognizing that those worldly pleasures or cyclical pleasures of cyclic existence are imbued with the suffering of change, the suffering of suffering, and the pervasive compounded suffering. So he or she then seeks to renounce them or turn away from them. So turning away here refers to renunciation, or the desire to definitely get out. So that person achieves, wishes to renounce the 6 realms of cyclic existence and then achieve for themselves alone liberation or nirvana. So here peace refers to liberation, or it's also called in Sanskrit nirvana. So this type of being is called a being of middling capacity, or a being of medium scope. So he or she avoids the causes of the suffering, which are the destructive actions and so forth, as well as the mistaken views which cause the grasping at true existence, and they turn away from cyclical pleasures of cyclic existence in order to achieve liberation. So this is the medium capacity, in a brief explanation of stanza 4.
Tatane Genla Rinpoche Debat do this. Sibi de la Machashi son du Sambi Chabas, Sanlu Chaba, San Think Chaba, Think Diment, Sanlu Chaba, Kui de Walla Machaba. Sibi de la Machabas, Sambi Chaba, Kui de Walla Machabas, Lalen Karju, Karinyalan Cheguresana, Deba Bunguris, Anyalang Laleng Chaba, Deba Bunguris, Dumbi Chaba Karugur want. 타바장 또 나냐면 상로에 괜들래 안에 제본딩 그래스 두두두두 데바 뉴뉴지만.
So in Genla Rinpoche's commentary, it seems like there's a very abbreviated explanation of this stanza. There's not quite a lot written about it, and basically where it says turning away from worldly pleasures or turning away from the pleasures of cyclic existence. Turning away here, Genla Rinpoche means that it's changing the mind's view towards these pleasures, or making it the opposite of what it was, is more literal. Making the mind's view of these pleasures the opposite of what it originally was. So Genlam Rinpoche's commentary says that. So then what needs to be done? And what needs to be done is the avoidance of destructive actions. And the destructive actions here refer to misdeeds. So avoiding the misdeeds. And why would one do that? What was the reason for doing this? And it would be to achieve peace for themselves alone. So Genlam Rinpoche's commentary just basically gives a brief explanation of turning the mind or making the mind opposite relative to pleasures of cyclic existence, abandoning misdeeds, and in doing this for the sole purpose of liberation for oneself alone.
Lama Sibi de la Macha Somoz, da Kui de Wal Chaju Maris, Chabaji Maris, Kui Dungel Machaba, Nabanjone, Carignane Jegurasana, Kui Dungente, Joconla Tenejomarasana, Ledan Yomo Bicunjola Tenejomaris, Ledan Yomo Bicunjo Moya Tashi Jegures, what the DB les said, Deba Jambal Kojo Maris, Leji Kunjo, the Yombo Kunjo Demal Gores.
So there's another commentary by the Dalai Lama where he says that this particular line, turning away from worldly pleasures and avoiding destructive actions, is abandoning the pleasures of cyclic existence. So abandoning those pleasures of cyclic existence and avoiding the destructive actions. And here talking about avoiding the things which cause the karma and the afflictions, so which are the root of cyclic existence. So here, avoiding destructive actions also refers to turning away from those actions which create the karma and afflictions which are at the root of the unpleasant states of cyclic existence in the first place.
Jonda del Karsugure Lujumala Saji Ni Jirwa Tabaduni Lujevas Tabaduni Lujeva Tabadubi Raji Della Saji Ni Jumua.
The Selpo Yanjer Laura. Sachi Ni Yure.
Saji Ni Tabaduni Lujevas and Ganjungu Samba and Ganjungu Samba.
Okay.
Ganjungu Samba. Ne Kuale Caesarang Dungel and Gabanjone Tabaduni Glo. 타바드니 글로들레 타바토나냐면 상로들레 타바드니 글로지보 데타시 제워스 차지 지제 타바드니 글로지보 간주고 상바서 말바 간주고 상바 지비 지제 데네 타바드비 랑제라지 덴바 타바토야게 타시 랑가르고 그레스 어데 랑게 내주도 송하게 사진이 되고도와.
So there's also the explanation within the Lam Rim that says that there are two facets to this. The first facet being the desire to definitely get out of cyclic existence and achieve liberation. And there's that idea of renunciation that takes place. But then what follows that renunciation or desire to definitely get out is the second part as described in the Lam Rim, which is what is the method one must practice in order to achieve liberation after one has renounced cyclic existence. So what practices, what must one engage in in order to achieve the results of the first section.
어제 가서 그래 타바 되니 로제바세 들라 사지 네 고아시 동에서 보다 수수 동에서 봐 사진이 되고다 고아지 제당 고아기 동에를 산당 비추지당 수수 동에 예다가 동에 메이 동에 하이 동에 수수 동에서 사진이 누웠어.
And then there are also two explanations where it says looking at the suffering of oneself has and the various types of suffering one has to endure, and then also focusing on the other types of suffering of the six realms that one would have to endure. Looking at the suffering of the hell, looking at the suffering of a hungry ghost, looking at the suffering of an animal, looking at the suffering of the demigods, of the human, and looking at the suffering of the demigods, and looking at the suffering of the gods. So here there are two sections as well.
다 고아시 동에서 받을 내가 매비녀봐 뭐바 매비녀봐 류양의 양도 류녀봐 예양 예상 주녀봐 예양 tö매도 주녀봐 두 매비녀봐 그지 사지 가제도
Hakome, the sarpa.
내가 매비녀봐 다 가서 레른 러시안 말배 내가 매비녀봐 뭐바 매비녀봐 류양의 양도 류녀봐 예양 예상도 주녀봐 예양 tö매도 주 사지 전체 dündo 동에서 주
So here there's an explanation of the sufferings of cyclic existence divided by 7. So here is an explanation of a division of 7. This is just going to take a moment. This is new information.
따바 되네 zambu 되게 말이스 하도서 하토버들 집아이나 레마주버데 다가 되거든 레세소는 내손을 마지오하게 내봐요 말이스 어때 집은데 되거든 산당도 거르스 하다메 대선 토버들 토바이나야 그 구이 대선 인사 신제들라 레다 녀모비 정화제데 때네요 말이스 그 마다번 존에 양동에 차와
Okay.
내봐 매비니 봐서 어디서
Okay, so the first type of suffering refers to the type of suffering that is thought about when referring to gods and humans and higher realms and so forth. Medium scope practitioner first recognizes that because of karma and afflictions, the beings who are abiding in those states are unstable. It's uncertain how long he or she will be able to abide in the states of the higher realms, because cyclic existence is always moving, and that being will have to fall to the lower realms once the karma loses its power that placed him or her into that state of the higher realms. So the first thing that a medium scope practitioner thinks about is this cycle, and the fact that even a god and a human will have to fall from grace and will have to experience suffering because of that fall.
다 가서 말 찾아봐 이나한테는 가서 그래 제거게 안에 파전에서 한다다 레다서 한다다 도술에 해봐요 말이지 그도 다지 말이네요 도술 걸로 고딘로네 안에 토부도술 걸로야 매바 차는 거 해봐요 말이지 고사 토부 줘봐 이나야 레다 토부 줘봐 이나 영그 주주네 산데 어디로 말이지.
We can see this uncertainty or instability even in our leaders or presidents or people who were previously famous, who achieved a certain level of fame within the world and were recognized by all as being famous and wonderful people. And then at some point in time, that presidency ran out or something happened to their character and they were no longer in that particular state. So we can see the uncertainty or momentary nature of these things even within our own world, or the uncertainty of things even within our own world. Uncertainty of status is the literal translation. Uncertainty of status.
어제 땅아술 찾아봐 인 상상아술 지부 연구를 상상아술 동의 연구도와 너와 지부 연구 지부 거야 되네 되고도 영고 동의 차 연구 동의 차도야 도와 차 연구도 그 되네 요만 해봐 요만을 지부다.
See, there is no certainty of status even within our own states. we might want to have happiness, and then even though we really want to have happiness, the next moment we're suffering. And then we're suffering immensely, and we think it will never end, and then suddenly we have happiness again. So we can see even in our own lives, even though we didn't predict the unhappiness or unpleasant state, we're suddenly caught up in it and want to get out of it, but are kind of out of control and don't have a way to get out of it because it's because of the karma and affliction. So we can see the uncertainty of status relative to our emotions, even in our own lives.
다 니바들 류양네 야도 뉴니바스 류양네 야도 뉴니바스는 뜻이 말베 양 할지 셰양 말지 돈돌지 시즈랑도 고라죠네 양 조부지 도셰 조부지 유 양 조부사발네 춘네 두아요 말스 두아요 말스 류양네 야도 뉴니바스.
So the next part is the need to constantly abandon bodies. So we're constantly, I remember now, we're constantly having to abandon the bodies. We have a human's body, then that human's body passes, and then we have a God's body, and that God's body passes, and so on and so forth. So we have all of these bodies that we take on that we have to abandon. So the next type of suffering that the medium scope practitioner or being of medium capacity thinks about is how many bodies have to be discarded again and again in cyclic existence.
당 아주 저와 도마매반 다디바도 저와래 조부 니바지 유 된다게 안에 루고 등 아주 다다 통화여 봐이나 자물리는 종우 말스 된다게.
So if we were able to take all of the corpses that we have had since beginningless time and pile them up on top of each other, they would be taller than the entire world. So a medium scope practitioner, a practitioner of medium capacity, thinks about this.
yang ji she yang ji walen gors yang ji walen dungege raji jo kui ji walen yang kui ji walen wa den ge kui ji wa de le dan yo mo bi wa ge kui ji wa de chun duwa yo maris duwa ma yang kui ji walen yang she yang kui ji walen she yang ni sang ju ni bas.
The next is the birth again and again. The recognition that if the causes for cyclic existence are not abandoned, then birth in cyclic existence will happen over and over and over again. So the next part that this type of being thinks about is recognizing if he or she doesn't abandon these causes, then rebirth will inevitably take place, and it will not be able to be stopped until the abandonment of the causal factors for cyclic existence. So then the thought of the rebirth again and again and why is the next step that the medium scope practitioner thinks about. Okay. So it's the recognition that if these things are not abandoned, then one will cycle in the cyclic existence of suffering. So it's the recognition without abandonment, there is suffering, there is cycling, there is 6 realms of cyclic existence and rebirth.
니바들레샤 ngoba mebi nyebas ngoba mebi nyebas karasna ane ngachu dawal gabu yogaris sinje thaji ge dawan dogo dongen dogo maris dawadle ane dawal ngoba yo maris ane ngachu cha thwa da ko bi da wo de su ngalo ane shimbu gaje jona den tele yaga zing ngachu go do wo de ngoba mebi nyebas ngachu sa khwa dang de ji ba chi ya yo marbe wo den do.
The next part is that within cyclic existence, desires are insatiable. So no matter what, we desire happiness like all other sentient beings desire happiness. So if we find something that makes us happy, we'll wish to do it again and again. For instance, if we find that tea makes us happy, we will put this tea and we will continue to drink it, and we will never be satisfied and we will never be fulfilled because cyclic existence is insatiable. So the meaning of this is finding something that makes us happy and indulging in it, but never really finding that happiness we're seeking out, or never really being satisfied. So there is no time that one says, well, I think I've had enough happiness now. That's enough. I'm satisfied with the amount of happiness that I have. The desire is always there to feel better and better and have more and more happiness. So here, this is the next part. Ngapa. Then the lay down your mom, the Dao Ritu, the drogre, the nipa, the lo supo mambo yugre, and sumba. Okay. So the order we're giving isn't the exact order you'll find in the text, by the way. So we'll get to all of the numbers for sure. So the next is that we will for sure have to experience the peaks and the low and all of the lows, meaning that we will be born into the highest level of cyclic existence, and then we will fall to the lowest level of cyclic existence, and this will happen again and again. So it's the thought that no matter what status or how high of a status we achieve, we will also achieve the lowest status possible as well. The Yanjir Suriname. Trobo.
Dama parent injury. Chitang has to trouble move. In a trouble, Jipu Tabo, Tabo Tampu, Kazu, Trouble Yabu, Trouble, never than the Mombo. DB trouble down, Gay trouble, Gay trouble to maybe never. DB trouble at the Deba Mosadu, Gay trouble, you know, Gom Mosadu. True maybe never. Dama parent maybe never so.
Oh, so the next is that we will not always be surrounded by Dharma friends. We will not always be surrounded by good company. So we might have company that engages in negative actions and misdeeds, and by hanging around with that sort of company, then we ourselves too will engage in these sorts of misdeeds. And if we hang around with a spiritual friend or a Dharma friend, then these are usually beings who are wishing to abandon the things that negative friends are engaging in. So the likeliness of meeting with Dharma friends is smaller and than meeting with those who engage in negativities. We can find this explanation in the great treatise on the stages of the path, as well as liberation in the palm of your hand. The cheek, the Dao Jitu, the lay down yomon, the Dapa Drogore. We've got 6. Sorry, there aren't 7. Sorry about that. I thought I counted 6 too and said we don't have 7. So here, there's also thinking of the suffering of the lower realms and thinking of the suffering of the higher realms. So thinking about the suffering that one endures as a hell being, thinking of the suffering one endures as a hungry ghost, one endures as an animal, but then also thinking of the suffering one endures as a human, thinking of the suffering one endures as a demigod, and thinking of the suffering that one has to endure as a god. So it's thinking of the suffering in these two categories, the lower and the higher realms.
어제 다 ngandui dunga samba 다 ngandui dunga dala bana da ane doshu de nyawares nyawala jeba yin nyawa chanye ge dunga da chanye ge dunga yores wo tinde san dang gores.
So first one begins with the suffering of the hells. One thinks about the hell realm and the suffering of heat one has to endure in the hell realm, as well as the suffering of cold.
어제 다드네 저쪽에 와대 녀와 찬년나 버든 지소나 안에 오제데 자그 자식 사지서고 말이야 사지 근걸로 먼저 차부 인사스 어떻게간래 안에 개범하고 되고야기 동행 용거 어떤 산당고 저러다.
And it's thinking that when one has to stay in the hell realm, and when thinking about, for instance, the hot hell, one has to live there for many, many kalpas, or many, many eons, in fire. And it's fire very similar to the fire that we know of, and has to live inside of that fire for many eons. So it's thinking about the amount of suffering that one would have to endure if he or she had to live in a fiery place for eons.
다 안에가 오들 차롱 아이스스 오네 어디지길래 네 로모 누구야 어떤데 산당고서.
And then the suffering of the hell, of the cold hell, is very similar to being frozen in ice and having to stay in that frozen ice for many, many years in a very cold place. So this is the suffering of the cold hells.
다 예다가 사자되는 짜당 신당 어떤데 추면 봐 어떤데 안에 사자되는 질은 예다들 지사야 통야 어떤데 강에 요거스 던데 예다 시 드바진다 나기 드바진 신나니기 드바지서 말বে 안지 가서 그래 예다 두고 쳐보 안에 매바도 파보 칼라드는 말로 봐 어떻게 강에 요서스 걔도 로바이나 못 봐.
So the suffering of the hungry, when we think of the suffering of the hungry ghosts live in a very dry place, a land where there is no water and no food that they can get. And they're constantly craving these things, and they have mouths the size of a pin and throats that are knotted up that don't allow food to go down, and stomachs the size of mountains that are never satisfied. So hungry ghosts have all of these characteristics physically of having pinhole-sized mouths and knotted up throats and very big stomachs. But there is no food or water for them to get, even though their stomachs are so large, and so they are never satisfied. And they wander looking for these things their whole lives. So they have to endure these kinds of suffering in the hungry ghost realm.
And
sometimes one hungry ghost mother would have 500 children, and it would be very painful. So they have to endure these types of sufferings. And one thing I forgot is, even if they were to be able to put food or drink into their bodies, it would immediately turn into a fiery, lavic substance that would burn them and scorch their throats. I forgot to translate that from before. So the Yanjer Suranang.
Soga samara marbe samara hat and then ngazu dawasha jamu yoro dawade sabu.
So, and then the hungry ghost For instance, when we see the moon would have a cooling effect on us. But a hungry ghost, when there is a moon present, is scorched by the heat of the moon. Then the nima tramodoe. Nima tramodoe.
Gunkal Tamuro. Gunkal Tamo Indi, the Hawk Tamuro. Yamasha, the Yama Tamuris.
So, and then the sun itself is very cold. So in the summer, when the sun comes, it's a very cold feeling on them. So they never get to experience a pleasant feeling relative to environmental conditions.
The nation, the Abbot tree, the Nazu made then Rebutungo. Put lesson last on Shinkamatu, Rebutungo.
So, and even if there was a tree there that we might see that was very full of fruit and apples and so forth, a hungry ghost would see that same tree and see a very dried up plant or tree that was barren.
Then the Jasunam, then the Lesona, Chotungo, Ulishimatum Tungo.
Knock.
Oh,
okay. So, and if they arrive at a lake, they wouldn't necessarily see a lake, they would see sand. So then, if they did actually if they were actually able to see any sort of watery substance, it would turn into pus or blood. So they would see pus or blood.
Waje da tundri dunge de da ngasu magi garo tongoro was. Mo chwa da ngasu tongo mari de da chone nya da duzul de na go dos. Nya duzu chwa duzu nga chwa se za go dos. Tundul dunge wod. Ji la ji sai dunges.
So then we move on to the animal realm, and many of the sufferings of the animals we can't even see, but we can see, for instance, the fish who have suffering. The fear of constantly being eaten by a larger animal. A fish is swimming around in the ocean and constantly being scared that a larger fish will come and eat him or her. So the fear of being eaten or killed by a larger animal. And we can see that with mice and cows and deer and various other animals, that even those animals have to be scared that a larger animal will come and eat them. For instance, tigers could come to eat deer and so forth. So they also have the fear of being eaten by a larger animal. And then the animals don't have a large level of intelligence. They're full of ignorance. So the human realm is a little better, but we can see that we still have these sufferings. When we are born, we have to endure the suffering of that birth, the process of that birth. As we age, various things happen to our body, and we have to endure the suffering of the aging. We get illnesses and disease and sickness and have to endure the suffering of that. And then finally we die. So we can see that even as humans, we have all of these types of sufferings as well. We have no independence. If we don't want to age, it's beyond our control. We're going to age. If we don't want to get sick, we have no choice. That's beyond our control. We will get sick. And we have no control over when we're going to die. So we know that we have these types of sufferings and can see these types of sufferings in the human realm.
duba dan tay dunga anu sosul mota abuju ne mota down ane o junshi kambal mambaya ane sosul ngat jala abuju ba ina ko meba chai kangyan duwas.
And we have to be separated from the things that we like, separated from the pleasant. For instance, if we live with our mother for a long time, our mother will eventually die and we will be separated from her. If we have a child, the child might die before we do and we have to be separated from the child. If we have a car, maybe that car gets into an accident and is destroyed and we're separated from that car. If we have a house, maybe the house catches on fire and we no longer have that house because of the fire. So in the human realm, we're constantly being separated from the things that we find pleasant or things we desire. In the human realm, we can see so many types of sufferings with the tsunamis and the earthquakes and the tornadoes, and sometimes entire families are wiped out by one weather condition or environmental condition. So we can see these types of sufferings as humans.
Maduba TV dungas, Maduba, and the Doja the Nazu Toya, Anjul Goya Gabayo Maris, Nazul Doja Mig Toya, Doja Anjul Goya Nazu Gabayo Maris, Mendu Jindu Nazul Doja Mig Toya, Anjul Goya, Maduba the Tebas.
And then we have to meet with the unpleasant. So bad things, unpleasant things to see or hear or experience, we have to meet with them. We have no independence from those events. So we will have to meet with the unpleasant. We will have to meet with bad things that we don't wish to meet with.
That Tamadal dubbing of Teja Manebi Nebas, dubbing of the Susun Dubayoba, Dubayoba, then Susun Dubayoba, the Susul Cabandus, Susul Dubayobi, Dubayobi Jalade, Susun Dubanaji, Susun Calacabandus, dubbing of Teja Manebi.
The manga Larona. It's the
dubbing of Teja Manebi doing some of the Tangasu Maganga Legajene. Legajene, Karajin Legajikos. Suzuki, Susul Gabuyunga Jigi, ne Gabuyunga, the Labolunga, Chet Begajigo. There, Susukun Deba Naji, Susulunga covers. Tabatu and Deba Yoris, Taba, Lanson Yunga Kali covers. Taji Chamber to and Deba Yoris, Lanson Yunga Kali covers. Then Najin also, not on the Jaguba, not on Deba, not on Label Hair Kali cover. Then Naji Chala, with Agatus Deba Yoris.
So, and to be able to achieve the pleasant is quite difficult. We might have a certain kind of work that we would like to do or certain things that we would like to experience, but we don't have the ability to meet with the circumstances to achieve these things that we desire. So we're constantly not being able to fulfill our desires or to fulfill our wants because it's not possible to achieve them. So being of medium capacity thinks about these things over and over again and familiarizes themselves with this over and over again, and then achieves the state of renunciation or the desire to definitely get out of cyclic existence. So yes, it's necessary. We have to engage in work. We have to do these things. But we can think of things like this while we're working. And we can make a union of our work and our practice itself. So we can establish or we can achieve the renunciation even though we're still having to interact with the world. So we shouldn't say, oh, we're just going to discard or throw everything that we have away. We need to still work and still do these things that we would normally do, but combine our Dharma practice with our work.
That demigod, Lama il doing a country or Lama ilata, Chi doing the Lama il you are, Guy doing you are, Jaganachi doing a was Malayoba Picho Kuzul was, Rabadua, demigod. And the cool demigod Hadanyandu Dene, demigod is again the Viji, Hajoa to the injury, Lajobang about the Joa to the demigod Lawars, and then Hashua to the Tune, and the Kuzul Hashua to Taduchi was.
So the demigods have all of the same kinds of sufferings that human beings have: the suffering of birth, suffering of aging, suffering of sickness, the suffering of death, the pervasive compounded suffering, the suffering of change, the suffering of suffering. The demigods have all of those types of sufferings that the humans have, but they also they're considered the poor gods, or the poorer types of gods. So they're constantly jealous of the higher realm gods, or the actual beings that we call God's realm beings. So they're constantly waging war on the gods, the higher realm gods, because of their jealousy. So they're experiencing all the regular sufferings that a human has, as well as the jealousy, because they don't have all of the things that the higher gods have. And they're constantly at war with them.
What the demigod, the Bajakashin lying from La. Ha Jubangamba to demigod Lamaris, Hanan Jubangamba, what to call Lamais, Laguaris, is it Haris, Hadoja to Suris, Hadoja and Hadu Zain, and of course Gisea and Dua Kangi.
So here in various texts, they're called gods, or lower gods, or the poor gods. But they can be considered a type of God, but they don't have all of the qualities or enjoyments of the higher realm gods. So this is why they're called demi-gods in the actual wording.
That demigod is demigod. Pachakashin da rejects you are then she were doing a rejabar. There's not Chenrezig the Mandula was. That in the zoo, Chenrezig was Demba English, could Chojak Dene, the Valley, Lenugars. What the Rejig is out the one she don't you are she. Zawad look at Sajar Sudi Waris. Kiba the Lama in Sal Lady Waris, Debut the High Lady. Hagen Rebel Longe Waris, then the Lutan Lama into the Del Chadulane. So there's in the Abhidharma Kosha by Basu Bandhu, there's an explanation of all of this, and it doesn't exactly seem to align with science. So science says that we can't find Mount Meru, we can't find any of the things that are explained in Basu Bandhu's Abhidharma Kosha. But the explanation there is that there's a Mount Meru and then there's a tree. And at the bottom of the tree are where all of the Nagas actually stay. And at the middle of the tree is where these demigods kind of hang out. And then the top of the tree, where all of the leaves and the fruit are where the gods abide. And the gods have all these wonderful fruits and so forth. And the demigods are very jealous because where they stay, it's barren. They don't have all of the fruits. So they're constantly waging war because of this jealousy that they don't have all of the things that the higher realm gods have. So you can find this explanation in the Treasury House of Knowledge by Basu Bandhu, or the Abhidharma Kosha, where the explanation is given of Mount Meru and a tree, and the gods having all this fruit at the top of the tree, and the demigods not having it and fighting. Da demigod is in the Nasuris, she cheated the Nasul was, Lutan demigod in Halsing. And it was a sounds of Matu.
So there's all kinds of wars taking place because the Nagas, or the snakes, is also translated as, Nagas believe we're at the bottom of the roots, the foundation of the tree, this is our tree. And the demigods say, well, we're at the core of the tree, we're at the trunk, we're at the main part of the tree, so this is our tree. And then the gods say, this is our tree. So there's constantly wars going on between them because of the uncertainty of who really owns the property. So, but there's some explanations where demigods are considered gods or inferior gods, and then others where they're not gods. Explanations. Sum.
Demigod, demigod.
Then Sum. Okay. So the demigods are considered to be within the desire realm when we speak of the three realms. But when we go to the gods realm, there are three realms that the actual gods can abide in: the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. So the desire realm gods are higher than human beings, but they have similar types of things that we do, similar attributes as us. So in the Abhidharma Kosha, once again, it says the gods abide in the moon and in the stars and in various places. But the scientists have gone to see if there is life form or human form on these planets and can't seem to find it. So here we find a contradiction with the scripture and scientific point of view. So the scientists believe that a star is on fire. But it's okay because we can find all kinds of explanations by the Buddha that were taught to capacity or taught to scope, where there weren't necessarily, that seemed to be contradictory, but were more of stages or graduated stages instead of contradiction. There are times when Buddha asserted a true self, truly established self, and other times when Buddha asserted the lack of a truly established self. There were times when Buddha asserted the lack of true existence, and other times asserted true existence or true establishment, so or an I or ego. So we can see that in all of the Buddhist teachings there seems to be these contradictions, but they're not really contradictions. There's a reason for them. The long Yanjur Suriname.
Seji dai sejin to se nyoken de se gol nyoba yin seji dai sejin to ro wa de se nyoken de se nyoba yin du se de se ya bo mata na de no lu sen yo ro jima and sa za ji chön gi ji dol da ya men si wa de na ji and sa ji gi chö de la ta ji le ba je ne chön mo no chu nya le jis ane chön yo ba yin na ta de de gres.
So there is a quote by the Buddha that says, "Do not listen to the teachings and adhere to the teachings just because I am the Buddha and I said them. Like a piece of gold, you should cut it and rub it and burn it for accuracy." So here, the meaning is the Buddha said, what Buddha meant by this is if there was any fault in anything that he taught that did not match up with logic, then it should not be adhered to. Like when buying gold, if someone were to buy a piece of gold and not cut it in half, it might just be sand coated with gold. It might just be gold filled with sand. There would be no way of knowing unless one cut it. And unless one performed all of these other tests on it, one wouldn't know if it was truly gold or not. So likewise, Buddha stated that the teachings should be looked at in the same way and should be analyzed and logic should be used And anything that was illogical or faulty should be disregarded and not practiced. And one should use their own intelligence and not just blindly follow the teachings of the Buddha.
다상 다당 가서데 오마바 제제진 로너버스 오마 탄주와 제제진 로너버스 산제게 산상빈도 따와데 산제게 송요버스 최가시 내바 주버스 가시 내바 마루버스 뉘제 두스 내바 주버스 돈이 내바 주버스 따바 군다 내바 마루버스 산제게 송버스 인 산상비 따와도 산제게 송요버스 다 오마베 때바이나 더 장도레스 네 장도데 제고레스 산제게 송이나 잡아 마주스.
So, Buddha, we usually adhere to the view, or use the view of the Madhyamika Prasangika, or the middle way consequence school. But there are other tenet systems that Buddha taught and asserted as truth as well. For instance, in the Chittamantra system within the tenet systems, or the mind-only school, the Buddha asserted that certain types of phenomena were truly established and others were not truly established. Buddha asserted that compounds were not truly established, but emptiness was truly established, or truly existent within the mind-only school. So we can see these differing views even within the tenet systems, but we don't say that they're mutually exclusive because they build upon each other. And there is a reason why these things were asserted by Buddha, which seem to be incorrect, but were taught for a purpose. So we can see differing views even in the tenet systems. So the Vibhashika school, the Great Exposition school, for instance, has so many views within it that are completely different than the Madhyamika school, or the middle way school, middle way consequence school. But we don't say that that's a non-Buddhist school. We say that that is a Buddhist school. So we can find differences in the other tenets, such as the Sutra school or the Sautrantika school, or the middle way autonomy school, the Madhyamika Svatantrika school. We can find differences in all of these views relative to the Prasangika view. So when we look at the ultimate view of the middle way consequence school or the Madhyamika Prasangika school, we'll see that all of these schools, from the Great Exposition school up to the middle way autonomy school, have differing views than the highest school.
Doba naji sanji sungwaris, shida maa kuru karan doba inna ten naji dagaris sanji sungwaris, doba sung ko gabajin penton waris, doba kuru doba naji sanji sungwaris, doba penton waris, sensabal penton waris, dada ki men teba nabaris, tibi nasa yogendel tibi men tegare, chemba nasa yoy chemba men tegare, kangal ten digmundos.
So the reason that these teachings were given, or they were given by Buddha, as Buddha was teaching to the scope of the vessel that he was teaching to. So there were certain types of beings who had more of an affinity for and more comfort level with the Great Exposition school, or the ideas within the Great Exposition school. So Buddha, because of his all-knowing mind, taught them that particular system of tenets. And then there were others who were more comfortable with the Sautrantika school, so Buddha taught them the Sautrantika school. There were others who were more comfortable with the Chittamantra school or mind-only school, so Buddha taught them that, on and up to the Madhyamika school. So Buddha recognized that different beings had different scopes, and each vessel needed to be prescribed a different practice. So this is why he gave all of these different views that seem to contradict each other. Very similar to a doctor. A doctor would not give somebody who had diabetes medicine for tuberculosis. So this is why Buddha prescribed certain practices for certain kinds of people who had different kinds of affinities or different kinds of emotional makeups. That's probably the most literal translation.
Tende shiriba dad juba, dema juba khilen ken shiriba shichibu yoken su sanji shubaris. 안에 그 대버 주바시다 대버 주바 축인가 대버 주바 다도 주바 피신 제모 담보 요아레스 안에 상질 주바레스 상질드네 슈도 대버 주바레 다도 주바레 슈디 상질 대버 주바레 다소.
So the non-Buddhist schools assert this they have this very, very firm resolve in that things are truly established or truly exist. So when they went to Buddha and asked him, are things truly established? Do they truly exist? Or are they not truly established or not truly existed? Buddha said to them, oh yeah, they are truly existent. They truly are established. So he answered them according to their own view.
다 상질 그런 데바나 손도 그 가부 좋은
So then these beings said, wow, this Buddha is the real thing. He's real. He must be omniscient. So then they began to also, like Buddha, and develop faith within Buddha. So slowly their wisdom increased through this process, and eventually they became Buddhists. So if one looks at the Buddha Dharma like this, then one will not see mutual exclusion, or will not see these things as being mutually exclusive. So the being of medium capacity recognizes the downfalls of cyclic existence, recognizes the suffering of all of the other realms that he or she isn't even in, and then develops renunciation or a desire to definitely get out because of the fear of the suffering of all 6 realms. So the more one thinks about the sufferings, the more one establishes or achieves the realization of renunciation. So there's the coarse suffering and the subtle suffering. So if one thinks about the coarse level of suffering, then one will have a coarse level of renunciation, or a renunciation that wishes to definitely get out of the coarse level of suffering. So if one then wishes to renounce the suffering of suffering, and then has a desire to definitely get out, for instance, of the suffering of suffering, and does various things, then he or she could be achieve rebirth into the higher realms. Okay. So maybe if anyone has any questions, we have about 10 minutes for questions, and then with dedications, and then we'll be right at 12. Yes, sir.
A three-part quick question. In the demigod realm, is there more war in the demigod realm than in the human realm? First part. Is it a different type of war? And if a demigod dies in the demigod realm from war, will they go down to a lower realm?
Okay. The Lama Yi, the Lama Yi Dan La, the Ma Jagadu, then the Me Lama Yi, the Ma Yerebe. Me Moa. Ma Moa. Ne. The Lama Yi Chungo. Okay. Then the Lama Yi Ma Dang Ngatsu Ma Drapo Due. Menda Dang Kongichiwa. Okay, so there's more. So there's more war in the human realm than in the demigod realm. In the demigod realm, then I asked, secondly, is the war like the war here? And he said there is explanation within Scripture of actual weaponry used between these two forces fighting each other.
ane ama ganda nga su chota yorwa zamba dosi taza mishin yo maro chuki dosi kuya wata zamba sinyang ka ching nga su buku ije nga chi chi ane nga su zamba dake langa nze yongdu sayung jago no sayung nga su koma su shina jili shati dosi ke jaga tara sangu yo zaro dan nga su yongdu ja koma su dan naka ngobore ngobo chingba jiye mudu dan naka de maju na bon
So when I was a small child, maybe 12 or 13 years old, we were making sampa. We had no machines at that time in Tibet, so my mother was making sampa by her hands, and I was bringing various things back and forth in order to aid in this process. And then suddenly an earthquake happened, and the human beings didn't know there was going to be an earthquake. We had no kind of way of knowing such a thing was going to happen, but the birds seemed to know. All of the birds in the trees were making a very large, loud calling sound, and then suddenly this earthquake happened and we couldn't move. It was such a strong force. And then immediately after the earthquake finished, the sky became completely blue without a cloud in it, and there was a completely clear sky. And then we saw in the sky an explosion that was similar to a bomb going off. After this chain of weather events in this clear blue sky. And it is said that this was the demigods and the gods at war, and this is what this actually caused this. It was very similar to, it was as loud as a clasp of thunder, loud as a thunderclap. But we couldn't see necessarily anything. And all of people in Tibet know this and will tell this story. The God. Lama Gemma. Oh, this was before the invasion of Tibet by the Chinese. So it's possible that there were even local deities at war, the Chinese gods, local gods, and the Tibetan local gods at war. So there's a possibility there too. So, you know, or was it the gods and the demigods fighting in the sky? Because that's where they would fight. So it's similar to this. War is war. Did that answer all of them? I don't know if I knew you had three.
Yeah, the third one is just if a demigod.
Oh, that's right. Okay, the demigod, the Shiena, then Dao Ritu La Kabar Jogudu. Same as us. They would go anywhere in the six realms.
But then now Chunal didn't do it. Lama is didn't do it.
God.
But not Damayoro.
So is this what is said in the Vietnamese tradition, that demigod would cycle within cyclic existence after death, just like a human? Yes, Adrian.
If all phenomena lack inherent existence, then is it possible that it would follow that the rules of science also lack inherent existence? Would it be possible for those to change based on karma, so that someone could be in a realm where, say, gravity is not the same and there is a mountain or
So, the kon the chu tamche demba madrupa yimba. Then at dang sunsang, the Chenrezig demba madrupa yimba. Then chi shena the Chenrezig, the Sri Chembo hakogomare gangin sena konsu demba madrupa, and chi shena the sacha jenda, the me dan lama yi yure, then the lo yure, and then konsu datugumare gangin sena the konsu le, the datugumare, konsu le.
And I'm just thinking that would be a logical, from our perspective, a logical answer.
That makes sense. Then could the Adrian Sampa Chishena the Chenrezig le the konsu datugumare le tsana Chishena konsu ri chembo datudu.
Chenrezig de abures kuzu chuja ga goro chuja. Machine neba machine neba gaze yonde de tongo hares. Tene machine neba zuzum tongo mares. What the
In a Kongi Trua the Longku the Sanje Papa Shanchu Sembi Papa Datudu, Hine Susuju Datugumare, the Drapudu. Okay. Saying, yes, it's possible that scientists don't have the karma to be able to see this Mount Meru. I gave the comparison just to try to make sure we were clear on the question of an ordinary being not being able to see the enjoyment body of a Buddha, because an ordinary being hadn't reached the level of Arya, so they couldn't actually cognize the enjoyment body. And he said it's the same, that they didn't have the karma necessarily to see it.
Logically, this scientist argument that these things don't exist, the hell realms and whatnot, from our understanding of reality is pretty valid, but when you take into the fact that all phenomena lack inherent existence, then this would negate that.
Right. Yeah, it's excellent. So we can find in the source of all my good. Can somebody give me a book, please, real quick? I got one right here. Oh, thanks. Okay. So in the source of all my good, we find the line that says, bless me to perceive all that's wrong with the seemingly good things of this life. I can never get enough of them. They cannot be trusted. They are the door to every pain I have. Grant me then to strive instead for the happiness of freedom. Here, this line in the source of all my good, or the foundation of all good qualities, refers to the medium capacity practitioner. So we've arrived in the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment at the section in the source of all my good, which is like the fourth stanza down that we read every time here. So bless me first to perceive all that's wrong with the seemingly good things of this life. I can never get enough of them. They cannot be trusted. So here the desire to renounce them takes place. They're the door to every pain I have. The recognition of their reality creates the desire to definitely get out. And then the wish or aspiration is to strive instead for liberation. So here the happiness of freedom refers to liberation or nirvana in the medium scope capacity. So that's what's being spoken of here. And someone who wishes to strive for the happiness of freedom must practice the three higher trainings, the higher training of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. So it's good if you can put these two texts together, the Lamp for the Path and the Source of All My Good, and see their similarities. And you can also find it in the abbreviated stages of the path by Lama Tsongkhapa, the Lamrim Dudan. We have no rush. We're going to go through this text very slowly.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe we'll do the concluding prayers and dedication. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn flowers, adorned with Mount